if you read the inaugural addresses of presidents, nearly everyone has said something very similar. I like Jefferson's the best. The spirit of America abhors a large military force. We've had a large standing army since World War II. Several million men and a few 100,000 women now. It consumes a stunning part of our national budget. Its impact on the Bill of Rights is beyond our capacity to analyze. Just its impact on crime, and the fear of crime is another cause for the violation daily of the Bill of Rights. All that money that could go to solve the problems of our society going to the symbol of violence, glorifying the power of violence and ignoring its pity on a globe already so overladen with the capacity for destruction that you see the most honest acronym of our time finally is MAD, Mutual Assured Destruction. And no sane society, and finally, sanity requires freedom, would pursue the arms race. There'll be 1 billion more people on Earth in 10 years. It was the end of the 19th century before they were 1 billion altogether. We can't really cope with that sort of number. Jefferson, in a nice little letter to Madison from Paris, where he had fled after the anger over his observation that human nature is the same on both sides of the Atlantic, in February of 1787, wrote that he doesn't know why, but somehow it seems that freedom is incompatible with large numbers of people. 1 billion people. Did you see that book called A Million that was published 6 or 8 years ago? It had 1 million dots. There's about 380 pages. 30 or 40 dots on the line, 24, 26, and just dots, dot, 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 dot. How many really? With a Soroyan could believe that each of those statistics represents one human being and soul as worthy as you or me. And how easy to begin to hate. The economics of the picture in the years ahead, with the depletion of sources of energy as we now use it, with the emergence of huge populations demanding more. There was a French cleric named Lamennais, one of my favorite thinkers, a teenager at the time of the Terror, lived through the Napoleonic period and after the Revolution of 1848. He is a man who had read and knew all written Western history. Pretty easy then. Observe that every society in history that has known stability has depended upon the resignation of the poor to their own poverty. Not a terribly unsound analysis. Watched the Iranians on television lately? Do they look very resigned? Seen crowds marching in Islamabad, or the teeming millions of the growing urban populations throughout the third world? watched the anti-American protests in Distrito Federal of Mexico last week. $180 billion plus going to arms with all that poverty. East-west tensions fueling that more and more when north-south differences in economic well-being grow. How will our country react to that turbulence? Do we really believe that you can preach freedom at home and support tyranny abroad? Is that possible? Is there some form of schizophrenia not yet diagnosed that permits it? Did it really work in Athens and built on slave labor? Can it possibly work in South Africa, built on slave labor, American investments pouring in? Having tripled in the last decade, the average return being better than 30% a year. Profits wrung from the sweat of slave labor's brow, the very thing Lincoln said you could never do. What will our reaction be as people struggle for freedom? Do we recognize that to abandon our principles of freedom in supporting tyranny abroad is a policy doomed to failure? Might analysis show that our conduct in supporting Batista made Castro inevitable? Are the facts that he wasn't a guerrilla warrior hero, that he was hiding in the hills? That the people couldn't stand Batista anymore and the path down from the Sierra Madre was strewn with flowers because people don't like to be butchered? What do we do in El Salvador? Can we really talk about democracy, freedom, and human dignity, and support the absolute authority of the Shah of Iran? A police state so pervasive that organizations like Amnesty International estimate up to 100,000 prisoners of conscience, tens of thousands tortured and killed, more than 500 executed every year. And the CIA, the trainer of the Savak, beginning in 1956, and the Shah put back on the peacock throne, a gesture quite different than our attitude toward George III, by Kermit Roosevelt, old Rough and Ready's nephew, by Allen Dulles, the Presbyterian brother, I can say that I'm a Presbyterian, the Secretary of State. A policy doomed to failure, as it should be. So what do we do with Marcos, with the government in Thailand? Will we really support the military authority in Argentina where there are 10,000 plus desaparecidos because we have some strategic notion that the military can dominate the people by placing its heel on their necks, and with our support we'll stop selling wheat to the enemy? And if we do, will we become the enemy? And above all, do we have the vision to recognize how very difficult it is to move from tyranny to freedom at any time, and particularly in this time? Lafayette sent President Washington the keys to the Bastille, saying that America is the natural repository. Some have suggested that that was an ambiguous statement. That was only several months after he was sworn in. Shortly thereafter, his close friend, Secretary of State Jefferson, appalled, I guess, but not as Burke was, with the course of the French Revolution, wrote Lafayette, "You must not expect to be transported from despotism to liberty on a feather bed." And after that came the Reign of Terror, with at least 15,000 people guillotined, among them the Carmelite nuns. Guillotined one after another simply because they refused to wear the sans-culotte, because their culture and religion told them they were to wear their clerical garb. And in a country that had known a Diderot and a Montaigne and a Voltaire, succumbed to Napoleon, Ho Chi Minh wrote us in 1946, the U.S. Archives reported for the first time last spring, a letter to President Harry S. Truman never answered. And the man who liked to quote Lincoln so much, Ho Chi Minh, suggested that Indochina establish a relationship with the United States similar to that of the Philippines. Well, the ironies are stunning when you think of 8 years of martial law in the Philippines and Marcos and Imelda billionaires. But Ho Chi Minh didn't have any better crystal ball than I do. He had some vague impression that it might be a good idea, and we didn't even bother to answer. We were turning that over to France. I spent the summer of '48 in China. I've been lots of places and seen lots of hard times, but there are people starving all over the place. And in Hangzhou and Kalgan and cities and towns like that, wooden carts would have to come through in the morning, and the poor couldn't bear their own. They'd drag them to the edge of the street and stack them like cordwood on the cart and carry them off. We could have taken ships with food into Tientsin and Shanghai and said, all we want to be sure is that hungry people get it free. But instead, we had this shame about having lost China. There were about 500 million of them then. It was a small country comparatively to what it is now. And our shame caused us to want to isolate them, as we've tried to isolate Cuba by a blockade for 20 years. An act that can only have one possible consequence unless the people in leadership there want to give up and go someplace else. And we don't see much of that. We're the luckiest people that ever lived. I can't tell you I think we entirely deserve it, but I'm awfully glad that we have it. We have abundantly and manifestly the capacity to solve our problems if we care. We really do. All this range of horrors that seem to confront us if we dare to look are caused by human conduct. It's not going to be 7 years of drought that gets us. It'll be 7 more years of inhumanity, if there's that kind of time. The question is one of will. We can survive. Indeed, we can prevail. When I say we, I don't mean we as distinct from they, because I come from the school of philosophy that Walt Kelly espoused through his Opossum Pogo. We have met the enemy and they is us, which is only to say there is no enemy, there's only us. And by our conduct, if we have the courage to act by principle, we can change the world. Let us have faith that right makes might. And in that faith, let us, to the end, dare to do our duty as we understand it. The last sentence of the Cooper Institute speech. But when you talk to people today about having faith that right makes might, they look at you like you're a little bit wacky. It's the only practical course. I think Disraeli was right when he observed that the practical man is the one who repeats the mistakes of his fathers. And the time has come to live by our principles. The question of survival is simply whether we can see the truth in time. I agree with Tom Paine, who wrote in the last phrase of his greatest book, The Age of Reason, "Convinced as I am that where opinion is free, the truth shall finally and powerfully prevail." Dare we demand to know U.S. conduct in Iran from 1953 through 1978? Are we going to let people like Senator Baker sweep it aside and say, I'm not interested in that old stuff. I just want to know how our hostages got taken? Is it totally irrelevant to the hostage taking itself? You think there's something in the water in Iran that made all those crazy people shout like that day after day after day? It's as simple as St. John tried to tell us. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free, if you dare. And if we don't dare, will we do it again and again? And what kind of road is that to go down? If we would permit the imagination of our society unfettered to achieve its fulfillment, every idea, if we would examine hard thoughts about freedom of the press, what is freedom of the press where it takes millions and millions of dollars to enter, and finally when Rupert Murdoch owns all the papers? Where are you going to get the information you need to know? Who killed the Maryknoll nuns? The Maryknoll nuns. My God, the Maryknoll nuns. You'll not find more loving human beings on earth. They give up everything. And they were murdered, and worse for them, mutilated. And we cast them aside. The State Department of the United States government insults them. They're troublemakers. What were they doing down there anyway? El Salvador, Del Mundo. We must not be afraid to be free. The Bill of Rights contains, in a way, the germ of inarticulate truth. If we can let it grow, expand it, enlarge our imagination to encompass at a rapidly growing rate the elements of the idea of human freedom. The ultimate question is whether, frightened and furtively, we will use totalitarian means saying we're protecting freedom, or whether we will have the courage to follow our conscience as a people who believe in freedom. character is destiny, Heraclitus wrote. If we dare to live free, the character that impels us will enable us to prevail. If not, we're waiting for the bomb. Thank you. Now, if anyone has a question after I've explained everything so clearly, I will consider it a reflection on the academic quality of this institution, which is a form of psychological fear that I hope will prevail. Going further, if you'll ask a question, I'll make another speech, or even tell you a story about Texas, the ultimate threat. And with that, I assume we can all go home.
What's the most effective way that the average U.S. citizen can affect the foreign policy of the United States?
I believe in the goodness of people. And I think the great frustration of our time is our inability to find a way to affect things that concern us greatly. I was an assistant attorney general in the Department of Justice in 1961. President Kennedy had said in his inaugural address, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." And he got as a result tens of thousands of letters. And they all asked, "What can I do for my country?" That's taking a little license, but that's really true. Now, unfortunately, I was working over in the Department of Justice, and the Attorney General's brother sent bushels of letters over to him because the White House staff was very small, saying, "Answer these." And that's how I found this out. I had thousands of these letters, and fortunately I had a lot of other people. We were all sitting there trying to answer these letters. And of course, only the authoritarian can tell you what you can do for your country. Our foreign policy is the most important thing, not just to our children, but to all children on earth. And each of us has an obligation to do what she can. And that requires the exercise of each person's imagination to decide what she can do best. I think we all must begin with knowledge. Human judgment, frail as it is no better than the toss of a coin without information. Information's hard to come by. But that's what places like this are for, in part. And we need to learn and know and choose. Life is choice for each of us. And then within that range, we need to decide what I can do best. What's most important to me? And we have to know that not only cannot each of us solve the problems, but no single one or even group of us can solve the problems. Poor Carlyle, who described democracy as the despair of people who haven't found a leader, didn't really understand that a leader can't solve these problems. The question of peace will be determined by the numbers of effective people that commit themselves to doing their part in achieving it. And you got to pick out something. And you got to work with it. And in mass society, you're going to have to work through organizations. If you decided that our foreign policy, insofar as it involves nuclear weapons, is the first priority, then you ought to learn something about what they are. You ought to listen to Dr. Helen Caldecott and read her writings about what they do. You ought to hear from organizations like SANE and half a dozen others that are developing as much information as they can about it. You ought to then begin to talk to others and try to enlist others and talk to the members of the Congress from where you live. You need to try to become a force of nature on it. If by character and otherwise you think you can work better in human rights, then get hold of something. Take an El Salvador. Join an organization like Amnesty International. Form an adoption group. Learn about some people down there, some people there who may still be alive, to whom a foreign voice could be salvation. Talk to others about it. We just can't let this thing roll on as it is. We've always said that an informed public is the foundation of a democracy. But we hear about these countries after the war starts, almost literally. And then we can't find a map in the house to figure out where they are. And I don't mean to imply that with the knowledge explosion we can each know it all. I just mean that each of us who cares has to believe that she can make a difference and has to really work at it. Like you'd work at something if you wanted a new car, or something that really mattered. And not be embarrassed about it. Look, I'm not really ashamed to be working for peace or to be working for a decent foreign policy. And it wouldn't be right for me to change everything by myself if I could. But I'm going to do my part, and I'm going to try to motivate others. All that leadership can really do is bring out the best in others, or the worst, to do the same. If that's too big, then we can't cope. Because today our foreign policy is premised first on the superior capacity for violence, which is rationally unacceptable. Second, on economic exploitation, if you will. We always say our oil. But the people who live there, just like the Cherokees in eastern Oklahoma who saw the oil boom come and go, are awfully poor, can't read or write, die young. If this prescription of more and more people becoming involved in ways that their informed judgment leads them is too big, then we're just waiting, because the proliferation that's going on, the idea with the attractiveness of power, that the bomb won't be possessed by those who would use it in time, is contrary to human experience. and we can change that. Had we been alert earlier, we could have changed it earlier. I think perhaps the most important discussion ever held within a cabinet of the United States was in the fall of 1945, and the discussion was on what to do about the bomb. We had a monopoly. And there were those who wanted to internationalize its ownership and prohibit all others from developing it. And it was brooded for months. And those who wanted to keep the monopoly prevailed. But you can't monopolize knowledge, even if you kill Julius and Ethel Rosenberg for it. And FBI files today reveal that the FBI investigators did not believe that Ethel Rosenberg knew anything about what was going on. Yet there was enough courage there to never say a mumbling word. While a live human being and mother, if that adds anything, was executed from fear and hatred. I can give short answers too, but I don't very often.
About 6 months ago, during his campaign in Iowa, John Culver made the comment that he thought in the years since its development, we'd all gotten blasé about the bomb. Comment on that?
Well, I think we're blasé in the same sense that Thoreau talked about most people living lives of quiet desperation. You know? Who me worry? You remember, was it Mad magazine?